Hello to you and welcome back to Fix A Day. My name is Wayne. Behind me is a 2012 Chevy Cruze LTZ with the 1.4 turbo, and it's another broken car that I bought. So this one, it has a suspected head gasket issue. It's a Cruze, so of course it probably needs a head gasket. But in this video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to fix it. Cross my fingers that there's nothing else wrong with it, like a crack or a melted piston, I don't know yet. And then I'm going to drive it and see how it turns out. So I also have an update on the Civic, and if you stick around till the end, I'll let you know how that went. So to get started, let's get this off the trailer. Alright, so finally got the car in the shop. It's also the next day, but I'm going to go ahead and get it on ramps, and when I start it up, I'm going to show you the coolant reservoir and why I'm almost certain that it's a head gasket issue. So I actually have this cap loose because it builds up so much pressure, but as you can see, it's just puffing away. So there's actually, there's at least one cylinder that has blown into the coolant passage. Obviously, when you cut the car off and you leave the pressure, the cooling system pressurized, it'll actually backfeed into the cylinder and make it almost impossible to start next time you go start it. Say like overnight or after a few hours. So it could also be a cracked head or something like that, but I'm crossing my fingers in this process, and I really hope that it's not that, but we're gonna find out. Started replacing the head gasket and anything else that I found, like oil cooler gaskets, hoses, and even a whole turbo. Then the head was resurfaced by a local machine shop before reinstallation. I did film a fully detailed video on this process, and that'll be coming out soon. Alright, so I just connected the battery cable back. That was the last thing that you need to do here. Let's give it a try. Alright, so this car does have push button start. So here we go. Foot on the brake, pushing the button. Oh yeah, it's another issue I'm gonna have to address. You gotta put the key in this little hole down here. Now we start it. Quite a bit of ticking. I didn't soak the lifters in oil before I reinstalled them, which I should have, but that noise should go away after a few minutes, maybe 1 or 2 heat cycles even. And the initial noise on startup, I don't know if you remember, but the oil filter housing was completely empty when I took it off, so it had to reprime that whole oil filter before it could get oil to the timing chain tensioner, so there was a bit of chain rattle there. But running very smooth, no more puffing out the cooling system. So we'll pick back up once the cooling system is all cleaned up. And that oil, that smoke, that's just oil from the new turbo. It was covered in oil. So here's my method for flushing the cooling system. Basically, this rear heater hose that comes out of the water outlet, that goes through the heater core. I've got the garden hose hooked to it. Through the heater core, around to the inlet side of the water pump, and it goes through the head, through the block, and it comes out this water outlet here. All right, well, here's the car after running for about 20 to 30 minutes. You can hear that those lifters finally fighting down. All right, so now that the head gasket's done, the one fabled issue that these cars have when the head gasket starts to fail is after the car cools off, you know, with the cooling system pressurized, and it sits overnight or a course of like 5 to 6 hours, it'll actually put coolant into the cylinders and make it hard to restart. That's one of the early signs that no one really thinks of with the head gasket, because they think maybe it's spark plugs or whatever, but it's usually the head gasket on these. So the car's been sitting overnight. I haven't touched it. I'm gonna go ahead and start it up, and fingers crossed that it's all clear. That is awesome news. They usually do start up, but they'll stumble to a stop and be hard to restart. But this thing has been perfectly smooth since starting, so I think that's a great fix. This thing runs awesome. Alright, so we're taking it out on the road now. Sorry for the blower noise. It's about 93 in Georgia right now, so it's pretty hot. So far, so good. A little bit of a clunk from the front right, which ironically was the same thing wrong with the Civic. I think it was a control arm bushing with the Civic, but this one I think might be a sway bar link. Alright, so we're about to hop on the interstate and see what it's got. Or just see how it does. I'm not crazy. About 65 on the interstate. I drive slow, but we'll get it up to 70 just to see how it does. So there's 70. Well, I had checked the Cruze earlier, but it seems like it's not working now. I did clean these controls, so maybe I got some gunk in there or something, because they were pretty nasty. But that kind of stinks, so we'll definitely have to fix that. But the car drives straight, it's very stable, it's quiet. That's the greatest thing I love about this car. And ever since I sold the last one I had, I've regretted it. And ironically, I sold it because it had a blown head gasket. It didn't overheat or anything, but someone did a previous head gasket on it and they didn't do a good job. They used roll-lock discs on the bottom of the head, so that's why that one failed. But ever since I got rid of it, I've been wanting another, because the gas pedal application, power delivery is perfectly smooth, the brake feel is perfect, the steering is nice and light, the infotainment, air conditioning controls, they're all very easy to use. The window switches are nice. It's all the small details are the ones that really stand out the most to me in a car, and this car really has it all. It also has a tilt and telescoping steering wheel. This one has power seats. My other one had manual seats, but it has like 6-way adjustable power seats, heated seats too. And the greatest thing of all about this that I love the most is the passive entry. So I don't even have to touch the key to get in and out of the car to start the car, which is fantastic. So we're going on about a 2-hour trip, so we'll pick back up once we get done with that. So one quick thing about these Cruzes, this is the first gen, so I think it was 2011 to 2016. If you look at the radio here, this is an LTZ model, so it has essentially every option except sunroof and I think it's called MyLink by Chevrolet radio, which is the premium audio. So it's kind of strange, but with these model cars, they have Bluetooth, you can connect your phone to it, but it's only for texting and calling. I think it'll read you the text messages if I remember correctly, but you can't play audio over Bluetooth. It does have a USB port in the center console, and if you connect an iPod or an iPhone to it, you can play audio that way. But if that doesn't work, you also have an auxiliary input in the center console as well that you can play audio through. And that doesn't have to be an iPhone, it can be any device. But anyways, we just went up a hill about a couple miles back. It was a really long grade, but not steep at all. They did have to downshift to kind of put it into perspective. And the coolant temperature going at the bottom of the hill was about 214, and it just started slowly climbing up all the way to 234. It's funny that even though it got up to 234 degrees, the gauge, the physical gauge, never even moved. So it's kind of funny on these cars. I guess they have a threshold where they never move. But anyways, after we passed that hill, it's been back down to normal temperature. It's at 212 right now, and it's just been hovering around there. So we'll see how it goes. I'll give you another update. I think there's another big hill between here and there. So this is the hill the second hill that I was talking about. It's Cartersville, Georgia, heading north on I-75. It's not steep, so to speak, but it is a very long grade. It's about 5 miles, I would say. Let's say like 20% of the semis that go up through here, they slow down below 60. But we'll see what the temperature does as we go up this grade. Not that bad. There is a slim possibility that there was still some air in the cooling system that caused it the last time. So the temperature's dropping now. But whenever you would go to accelerate, you could hear turbulence in the heater core. So there was definitely some amount of air trapped in the cooling system. And maybe there still is, and that's why it's still warming up the way it is. It's definitely not as bad as it was on the way down. We're headed back home now. But yeah, we're down to 219 and still dropping, so. Alright, so we made it back from the trip without a hitch. After the second hill that we went up, I explained that the coolant temperatures still rose, but they didn't go anywhere near as close as what they did before. So I'm still under the impression that there was some air in the system. You may also notice I'm wearing a different t-shirt. It's been about 3 days, and I've been driving the car every day, just a little bit here and there. I've also been monitoring the coolant level, and it hasn't gone down any. And I haven't had any startup issues in the morning, which is the first early signs of a head gasket issue on these. And also with driving the car, the day after we took that trip, the check engine light actually went away. There was previously a turbocharger underboost code, that coolant flow insufficient code, and a slow lean to rich response for the O2 sensor. So since all of those codes are gone and they haven't come back, I don't think that they'll need to be addressed for right now, but if they do, I think I'll definitely make a video on it. Now, just like with the Civic, this is kind of the same kind of video. I'm going to do a price breakdown as well. So I've got it on my phone here. You know, I bought the car for $1,200 and I spent about $24 in fuel going down there and back to transport it. I did have to tow it. I spent $129 on the head resurface with the machine shop, $185 for the turbo with gaskets from eBay. So you know how I said it was a cheap turbo? It's very cheap, so hopefully that holds out. I spent $26 on the specialty tools for the timing, $177 on gaskets, bolts, hoses, $57 on the 2 cam bolts, which are also the VVT oil control valves, another $13 on hoses, $4 on hose clamps, $6 on RTV silicone, $16 on shop supplies like rags, brake parts cleaner, things like that. $42 on a new key fob. I did have to get a new one. The old one worked well enough, but the only way to lock the car was manually with the key, so I didn't want to have to do that. And $25 for an oil change, so that brings the total to $1903.11 for this car behind me, running and driving. And if you want to include things like the tag, you usually don't include those in a price because they're vehicle specific, and it even depends on the age of the vehicle, so it's subject to change. But for anyone curious, the tag office valued this car at around $5,100. So 7% tax on that, plus the title fee and the tag cost was $397. So if you add that into it or take it into consideration, this car costs $2,300 to get it running legally on the road. And anyone that's curious, I also put it on insurance and I have a price for that. It's about $61 a month. I do have a multi-car discount, so it's not going to be as expensive as if it was just by itself, but I think normally it would be about $76. So I think that's going to conclude this video on this car. It was a lot of work. I told you with the Civic video that I was going to be using it to drive back and forth to school, just a daily commuter in general. That's the same thing with this car. It's a massive improvement quality-wise, comfort-wise, and technology-wise from the Civic. So this is going to be primary transportation to and from school. I'll definitely post an update video in the future letting you know how this turns out. So that's going to be it for this video. If you liked it, please give me a thumbs up, leave me a comment on what you thought or any suggestions, and I'll catch you in the next one. Thank you. If you remember from the Civic video, I made a promise at the end that I would give you an update on how that car went. So with the Civic, I actually did end up driving it about 7,500 miles, almost 8,000 miles actually, by the end of the semester. And I actually no longer have that car anymore. I ended up selling it to my mother-in-law, and she's still driving it now. So I actually did that about 2 weeks ago, and she's enjoying that. So the Civic is still good. I really didn't have to do anything to it in the time that I owned it. So about the Civic transmission, I know that I had mentioned that there was a roaring noise or a rumbling sound that was coming from the car, and during my initial inspection I did determine that it was internal to the transmission. Now, funny enough, that it sounded like a bad tire, or maybe some dry rotted tires, or cupping or feathering, something like that. It sounded like a bad tire that was roaring on the road. So interestingly, near the end of me owning the car, around close to the 8,000 mile mark, once I finished the semester and had a little bit more time, I actually rotated the tires, and coincidentally the noise went from the rear, which I had always thought that it was, to the front. So in addition to that, you could also start to feel it in the steering wheel, the rumbling, and the brake pedal when you would put your foot on the brake. So it was definitely never a transmission issue at all, and it was the initial gut feeling that I had when I first put the car on the road and left my driveway. It was a tire actually, after all. The tires were fairly old, and I should have maybe investigated that more initially. I think the tires were around 5 years old. So they are near the end of their life, but they still had good tread, but doesn't mean that they're good. So it was definitely a tire issue, and I'm thankful that it wasn't a transmission issue, because that would have been disastrous. That would have been a lot more expensive than I was hoping for. Actually sold the car for $2,200. So the going rate for those cars is around $2,500 to $3,000 depending on condition, and that wasn't perfect, and it was also family, so I was able to give her a pretty good deal on it.